Hey, we are recording. So, good day, everyone. Welcome again for another LaSalle Sustainability Lectures. I'm Ari Sobando. I'm the Assistant Dean for Research and Advanced Studies of the Gokongwei College of Engineering, De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines. Today, we have an exciting lecture entitled Teaching Sustainable Development Goals Through Advocacy and Multimodal Learning. Our speaker for today is Ms. Gina B. Ugalingan, who I would be introducing in a while. But before we officially start our lecture series for today, let's have a short prayer.
Let me be the change I want to see, to do with strength and wisdom all that needs to be done, and become the hope that I can be. Set me free from my fears and hesitation. Grant me courage and humility. Fill me with spirit to face the challenge and start the change I long to see. Today I start the change I want to see. Even if I'm not the light, I can be a spark in faith, service, and communion. Let us start the change we want to see, the change that begins in me. Today I start the change I want to see.
Even if I'm not the light,
I'm not the light, I can be the spark. Faith, service, and communion. Let us start the change we want to see, the change that begins in
Jesus in us.
Jesus in us.
Thank you, Sir Riodel. Before we start our lecture series for today, I will have first an overview of the Sustainability Lecture Series to be delivered by none other than Dr. Raymond R. Tan, the Vice President for Research and Innovation of De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines.
Hello and good day, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this month's edition of the 2026 IALU Sustainability Lecture Series. This lecture series was launched in January of 2021 as part of our response to the need to bring sustainability issues and initiatives to the forefront of discussions within the International Association of LaSalle Universities, or IALU. This lecture series was initially spearheaded by De La Salle University via the Center for Engineering and Sustainable Development Research, and nowadays is organized with the assistance of the University Sustainability Office. The team initially consisted of Professor Dr. Kathleen Aviso, Professor Dr. Alvin Colaba, and Chancellor Emeritus Dr. Carmelita Quebenco, with myself as the initial group that conceived and launched this. We have since expanded the team, and we are joined by Professor Dr. Aris Ubando and the entire team from USO, led by Executive Director Antonio Nonoy Maralit, and represented here by Riobel Siluan. This team hosts this
Aba,
event.
problema mo na yun. Na-provide na kita. Aba, birthday mo, ako mamamblema. Para naman nakakaloko naman yan.
Francis's Laudato Si encyclical, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, to discuss matters pertaining towards greening the planet to ensure a more sustainable future for its inhabitants. Finally, I wish all of you, once again, a stimulating and thought-provoking event this morning, and hope to see you in future editions of this lecture series.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tan, for the introduction of the LaSalle Sustainability Lecture Series. Okay, we can now proceed with our lecture, which is entitled Teaching Sustainable Development Goals Through Advocacy and Multimodal Learning. This webinar explores integrating sustainable development goals into language and communication classes by leveraging students' everyday digital activities, such as creating, sharing content through advocacy plans, infographics, and digital presentations tied to personal and community issues. To demonstrate how these multimodal tasks enhance communication skills while fostering social awareness and meaningful engagement with sustainability. And now to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Gina B. Ugalingan. Ms. Gina B. Ugalingan is a dedicated faculty member in the Department of English and Applied Linguistics at De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines. Ms. Ugalingan teaches academic writing, oral communications, and social linguistics while supervising pre-service teachers and mentoring theses. A PhD candidate in applied linguistics, she has published in international journals, contributed to a Routledge handbook on English language education in the Philippines, and recently defended her dissertation on Filipino Christian social media influencers' religious identity construction. With expertise in integrating SDGs into ESL via advocacy and multimodal tasks. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Ms. Gina Ugalingan.
Good morning, everyone. All right, so allow me to share my screen as well. So thank you very much to my university, De La Salle, and to the International Association of La Salle Universities for inviting me to share in today's sustainability lecture. So this morning here in Manila, so if we have audience from other countries, so welcome, good day. I will be talking about how we teach SDGs in our classroom, particularly through advocacy and multimodal learning. So before I start, I want to share a simple reflection in terms of introducing SDG to our students. I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking, are we introducing something completely new to them? Or are we helping them label what they already know, particularly issues that they're also advocating for because they've already noticed and experienced them? So many of our students may not immediately identify certain concerns such as, okay, so this is SDG 1 or it's SDG 3, 7, etc. However, we understand that our students are actually surrounded by these realities, and we see them, they are very open when they talk about their own mental health. We see how they are very passionate about access to meaningful education. We also experience and observe how they participate on gender inclusivity, right? So especially on how they do this online. So we understand that how they are influenced, particularly how they browse their social media accounts, peer conversations, perhaps, their actual school or community experiences. So even the brands and online influencers that they follow. So in other words, their awareness may already be present, but it may not yet be connected to the formal language or jargons that we use when we talk about SDGs, right? So this is where our roles as educators become important because we now help our students connect their everyday concerns with the larger social goals. And we can guide them by asking deeper questions. Of course, we know that they have already asked those difficult questions, but we're helping them examine evidence so that they don't just accept what they see online, but they try to be critical and they examine what they see and they understand not just their perspective, but even the perspective of other stakeholders and how they communicate this to actual real audiences and not just for classroom purposes. So in our classroom, in language and communication classes, the SDGs become more than topics for discussion. They actually become opportunities for our students to practice responsible communication. So through advocacy and multimodal learning, which I will share later on, sample outputs from my students. But the goal really here is moving from understanding, because yes, we know that they are actually aware of what's happening and their ability to communicate it clearly with clarity and purpose. But hopefully, the real impact that we're after is translated into action and then later produces positive change. Before sharing the sample outputs and our own classroom practices, I think it's very important to understand who are our learners, right? So many of us understand that most of the generation differences that we have a while ago while we were having an earlier discussion, a member of the group actually shared that in his time, Spanish is actually part of the required curriculum, right? So we belong to different generations, and we understand that most of our students belong to Gen Z, where they grew up in where internet, social media is just by click. It's not difficult. And like during my time, I have to wait for the dial tone for it to appear first before I can connect to the internet, right? So age revelation here. But we see them, the streaming platforms that they have, the constant and immediate access to real information, right? Real time. So because of this, they do not only learn from how we learn things in the past where we have to read pages, but our students are learning through multimodal materials. And we have to adjust to that. They follow different online influencers, they react to issues, they're very open to how they feel, whether this is offline or online. So the Statista report that you see on this slide describes how Gen Z are highly engaged with video content, social media, online communities, peer influence communication. So it also shows that they value this generation, the Gen Z values sustainability. They understand that diversity, transparency, and I think the most important thing is authenticity, because they can they're very aware if this is something authentic or not. So this generation, they're not just about digital participation. Of course, we understand also that we have to educate them how to be responsible digital citizens in the online community. So this is where we come in as teachers. We want to help them move beyond their surface awareness, and then we want to guide them to ask better questions. So the need to introduce SDG, particularly on how we can actually incorporate multimodal learning, is very it matches what they know and what they already are as digital natives. So the graph that I'm showing you shows how teenagers, particularly the Gen Z, are well connected to video formats. That's why they're very present on YouTube and TikTok, right? So not going into details, we understand that the pattern is clear. Gen Zs are not only reading information online, they watch, they scroll, they react. So it's something that we have to consider when we think of outputs that we require from our students. So if they are already live in visual and in digital spaces, therefore the classroom tasks should also be able to adjust to that. So we can now introduce, and we have to learn how to do them as well, because honestly, like, I'm part of a generation that I'm not really like too techy, so I have to also learn how to do these things so that we can require these outputs to our students. And speaking of digital participation of our students, we like a concrete example on how they do this is cancel culture. Of course, there are always pros and cons on cancel culture, but this is one concrete example on how we see the active digital participation of our students. But this is where we have to come in, because we have to teach them that not everything that they see online is something that they have to always like embrace. So we have to think of ways on how to really help our students. So when we ask our students to create sustainability developmental goal outputs or advocacy outputs, for example, we are not starting from nothing. We are actually building on the fact that they already care and that they are already engaged. So the classroom, therefore, can help this engagement into a clearer, more credible, and more responsible, meaningful activity. Maybe a little engagement here. So if you can type in the chat, maybe just one word, what comes to mind when we talk about SDGs. So either something very close to what you're doing now, what you're observing on the news. So maybe just a word, or maybe you can pick a number from the SDGs that you see on the slide. If you can type that in the chat, please, just so I know where you are. Like, what comes to mind when you try to think of SDG? There, I see a response. Thank you very much. Right? So there should be an urgency, right? How about the others? Perhaps a topic close to the community that you belong to? Maybe I'm not seeing the rest of the answers. But yeah, thank you very much for a very considerate participant. Thank you very much. All right, so it can be very simple, right? So if we ask our students, perhaps they would answer so many possible topics, particularly close to their hearts. In the Philippine context, so perhaps the first or obvious answers would be poverty or corruption, because this is what we see on media, on public discussions, everyday conversations. But this also makes me ask, particularly when I enter my class, are these the same issues that our students immediately think about? Because if you're going to ask me, the first thing that comes to mind is definitely corruption, poverty, right? Because this is something that I personally observe and experience in my community, right? I don't have to go national scope, but just the community around me. But the question is, would this also be the same response that we will get from our students? For some students, probably the answer there is yes, because these are they belong to this bracket of poverty they experience, and they've seen it firsthand. But for the others, they may first think of mental health, gender inclusivity, misinformation, and other social issues that they encounter and engage in social media. So this is why I find it important, particularly in my own practice, to begin where my students are. Okay, so even if I like education as the topic, or poverty perhaps, but if this is something that my students are not really close to, then I can't force that. Okay, so if we want to teach the SDGs meaningfully, we need to understand what issues students already notice and what they care about. Sometimes what we care about may not necessarily be their immediate world. So I was invited today to share my own classroom practice. So I want to share with you how we do it in the language and classroom, communication classroom. So in our department, so I belong to the Department of English and Applied Linguistics. So we handle the course named JEPCOM, or Purposive Communication. So I will not go into detail the course description, but I want to share with you and highlight that one important point, that this course asks our students to use communication for real purposes, meaning outside the classroom, for actual real audiences and real social context. That's why we place there in the Philippines, to really make it, to give them context, okay, and then to really observe what's happening. So this is where SDGs naturally come in, because the SDGs give students meaningful issues to talk about, so they can now create materials. So instead of treating communication in our classroom on surface levels, such as grammar, essay writing, how to look for sources, how to do correct oral presentations, we want our students to see communication as a tool for awareness, advocacy, and their actual participation. Not just because they have to earn a grade for it, but because they really want to create an impact and positive change in their community. So in our course description, the phrase "in the Philippines" is important because we want our students to bring these issues closer to their own communities. So instead of discussing issues in a global perspective, of course, this is a global initiative. If we really want to see the impact, they have to start first on smaller scale, because sometimes plans can be very grand. They may sound very they may sound excellent, but if we really examine them, nothing is really happening. So what we do is we try to think of small scale initiatives to really create those impact, because we understand that small impacts, if we put them all together, would create that change that we're looking for. I remind them to begin with what they see and observe. So perhaps they may not experience it, but just simply observing it around their community. So we can start from there. So when we integrate the SDGs in our classes, so I'm sharing with you the LGAS, we are also trying to give our students the meaningful reason to participate, because I think this generation would always ask the question, so what? Like, what's in it for me? I think that's a question that when we find our students not interested, they're not engaged because they don't really see the reason why they have to do it. Right? So giving them the answer as to why they have to do it more than just because you will fail if you won't do it, right? Or I will not give you a passing grade at the end of the term if you will not accomplish these outputs. I think they always, this generation are actually looking for a real change, and they really ask difficult questions sometimes. So we, as teachers, as educators, we have to be ready with those kind of questions. So regardless of the course that you teach, perhaps we have participants that may not necessarily are teaching English or communicative classes. So whatever the course that you're teaching, I think SDG tasks can help our students practice several important skills. The first thing that comes to mind is definitely how helping our students to think critically. And I think that's very important in the digital landscape that we now have, because we understand that they cannot simply say that an issue is important. Instead, they need to ask, just like what the participant answered a while ago, there should be an urgency. Why is this problem persistent? Like, we know that poverty existed like years, decades, centuries back, but why does this problem continue to persist, right? And why does it continue to happen? Even if you have like a lot of solutions, whether this is community initiative, national, global, international, whatever, but why is it that as if nothing or little changes are happening? So we have to help our students ask and think critically. Second, I think, is for them to learn to communicate clearly. So regardless if this is an engineering course or it's a math, science class, we have to help our students communicate their ideas clearly. So of course, this is where we try to come in, how they have to like make coherent, organize, make use of different language tools on how to make their ideas and choose their language appropriately. Another is perhaps thinking about responsibility, that they learn to think about responsibility not when they become, like when they start being part of the workforce, but even now as students. How can they have that, be an active participant of these issues? So when students work with social issues, they begin to see that communication is not only about expressing their opinion, it is also about being responsible on how accurate, how fair, and how sensitive they are to the people affected by the issues, assuming that they are not part of that. So lastly, in our own classroom practices, of course, we want to integrate how we can connect the classroom work with the civic participation. So this is not just about creating an output for a grade, but making sure that they see the importance of what they're doing. So for me, the value of the SDGs integration is not only that students learn about sustainability, more importantly, they learn how to use the skills, particularly the digital skills that they have in relation to real problems. So this is an example of one of the many outputs that we require our students to accomplish in our class. So we usually ask them to produce a problem solution evaluation essay. This sounds very academic, but the idea is simple. Students choose a local in my class, I really ask them to look for local issue, something that the community experienced connected to an SDG. So I require them to research about it and perhaps look at existing solutions already or what possible solutions can be done about this. So what I find useful about this task is that it prevents them from just getting any information that's already available online. So it really requires them to do the work. Of course, there would still be sources available for them, but it requires them additional effort to really examine what's happening around them. So here, questions such as, in my community, what do I observe? What is actually happening? Because not all of the demographics of the profile of the LSU students are part of the poverty issue. Perhaps in their communities, these are gated communities where there are 24/7 security guards, right? So we want to ask them what's happening in your community, what are your actual observations or experiences. So now we allow them to be participant. I want to touch a very timely topic, which is AI tools in our classroom. I think if there should be a class that would be affected, that would be us, because it's so easy to use any AI tools to really produce the problem solution that we are requiring our students, right? A simple prompt such as give me a 5-paragraph essay. In a matter of seconds, my students can produce that, right? So what do I do now? So I want to acknowledge, of course, that this is not just what's happening in my class. Perhaps you're also experiencing this. So we understand that because they're digital natives, and the moment you tell our students do not use any AI tool, they're very creative. So I think we're past that do not use rule. So we have to help them, therefore, on how we can check that they have ownership of their output. So it's no longer a question, can students write an essay? The way I learned how to write an essay is totally different on how students are learning how to write, particularly this generation and the future generation. So when I was researching about it, I even looked at how common AI chatbots are actually used by our students nowadays, because we understand that it's a topic that's very complex. I know we can talk about that later on, but the goal here is not only for students to produce the text, but for them to take ownership of the message, whether they're using ChatGPT or any other tool. So going back to my class, because I understand that yes, they can actually simply ask ChatGPT to produce that output that I'm requiring them to do. So this is where I now introduce the infographics or the multimodal outputs from them. So I know that they will seek help using ChatGPT or any AI tools. So it's so easy for students to ask for a summary, read this article, give me a summary, etc. So what I do is, instead of working against AI, and I think this is a call for all of us, we need to teach our students how to work with and around AI responsibly. So this is where infographic task becomes helpful. Why is that? One, it pushes them to process information and not simply to reproduce it. So assuming that they ask AI to write them that paragraph, right? So I asked them to produce an infographic because an infographic is a very simplified but condensed material. So meaning it's not heavy in text. One of the good qualities of an infographic is that the moment you see it, you actually understand the message, right? So that means heavy text is discouraged. You don't have to put a lot of text there. but it presents a complete information. So the challenge now is that, do I understand what I wrote in the essay? Okay, do I understand what I've, like, all the things that I wrote there, if I'm going to translate it now into an infographic, because I usually ask them to present this in class, to give them ownership and to check if this is really something that they understood. So this is where multimodal learning becomes very useful. Students learn that meaning is not carried by the words alone, whether they got it from ChatGPT or any AI tools. Meaning can also be communicated through how they will use layouts, how they will use images, how they will use their sources, because I require them to use sources, academic sources. Okay, so I introduce to them how our DLSU library sources would be very helpful, where they can get a lot of academic and reputable information. So now when I show you the sample outputs that I have for my class, please also consider that I'm not after how professional the infographics would look like. Remember, this is a classroom communication class. We don't teach the techie part of it, but it's really more on the communication or the message of their outputs. All right. So let me share with you their sample outputs that we have in the class. All right. Okay. So this is a sample infographic from my students. So because they're digital natives, I wouldn't say everyone, but they know how to use tools, digital tools. But what I'm after is the message, right? I'm after how they can translate what they've researched into a more concise manner. So remember, these are students, not professional digital marketing experts, but at least I understand that there is research involved in this output, because as you can see, they included information such as statistics that 1 out of 10 people worldwide. So they have placed that in their output. So teaching them to look for accurate information. So when I check their output, I always ask them to please make sure that you get your information not just on random websites, but you really read sources that are from reputable sources. So they are incorporating how to cite sources. So since we require them how to use APA, then they have to use APA type of citing their material. So here, their ability to use images to capture the message that they want to address. So this example is perhaps something close to the student's actual experiences, particularly eating disorder. We see how beauty is defined in the digital world. So they've experienced how they conform to it or how they want to go against it. And one of the issues that they see here is the neglect of eating disorders. So either this is something that they observe among their peers or something that they're actually open to talk about. So this is SDG, good health and well-being. So SDG number 3. So here, my students are showing how they can incorporate things that they've researched, and now they're using these principles of what an infographic should look like. It should present concise information, not heavy on text. They are using images. They know how to cite their sources, and they're now communicating what they understand about what they wrote. So since this is a problem solution, so they have to look for the causes and effect, at the same time what they can offer. So here we can see that because they're digital natives, even the solutions that they offer is something related to online initiatives as well. So if you can see on my screen, they have here steps on how to like implement this solution, right? Another is that they are also aware that there should be more conversations about it. So these are also like steps on how to like make this solution feasible, how to make this solution not just on paper, that it looks good on paper, but it would really work if they will implement it. So that's usually the challenge that I give to my students, that yes, you see this problem, but can you think of solutions that even students can actually initiate, that you don't have to wait for the government to release funds for you to do it, right? Or for let's wait for the funding to come in before we can start doing something about it. But the challenge in my class is that let's think of small ways on how we can take part of providing solutions without really having to think that we really have to have like this budget, this funding, etc. Because if that is the case, then we can't really like do something about the issues that they are presenting. So here, the students are thinking of ways that may not necessarily be on a bigger scale, like they have to target a lot of people, a lot of participants. They're just actually thinking among their sphere of influence, like the friends that they have on Facebook or Instagram. They're just actually thinking about that and how they can create these changes. Another output is, okay, so let me share another output. So that one is how they see good health and well-being. So in their case, how they understand that is through, so the eating disorder is something that they thought about, right? So this is another one. Sharing screen again. All right. So here, if you're not familiar about the geography of the Philippines, so Cebu is one of the major cities in the Visayas. So this is the community that they chose, right? So they want to think of smart approach on how to do the waste disposal. We know that our students are well-traveled, so they can actually compare how waste disposal is done in other countries compared how we do waste disposal in our country. So we understand that, yeah, we need to separate the different types of waste that we have at home, etc. But then we see our the garbage trucks collecting the trash. We'll just put them all in the truck without really separating, right? Of course, it would depend on different cities here in Metro Manila. But here, the students thought of waste against waste. So even the play of words, right? Waste against waste, right? So our students are really very creative. So here, a while ago, where you can see an infographic or a slide where causes are separated from effects, here it's combined, right? But with the same principle, they know how to choose images that would capture the message, because this is a a language class, we are requiring them to look for accurate sources. So you can actually see here that they have their sources in parenthetical citation to really give you accurate information, because like what we said, sorry, like what we said a while ago, we want them to be responsible in sharing information. They're not just getting something that they see, that they see first online, but they really choose something that is accurate from credible sources. And we see that in this particular output. And they're not using heavy text. They're just using a phrase or a sentence to capture the information that they want to share. So even the solutions, just like what we said, we want to think of solutions that would not necessarily involve funding or like the bureaucracy of so many like approvals for a solution or project to be implemented. Instead, we are encouraging our students to think small scale, because we want them to just make it feasible. Because there are already solutions available out there. So we're now challenging them how to make these solutions feasible. So even the hashtag, right? I'm encouraging them to even think of hashtags that would somehow click, that would somehow appeal to their target audience so that they will participate. Most of the movements that we saw online are actually created by very engaging and very appealing movements, right? So, and they actually start with either these are hashtags, Me Too movements, etc. So we are also teaching our students on how to do that. So now that I've shared with you the outputs of my students, allow me to go back to the slides that I was sharing with you a while ago. So let me just go back. So after looking at the students' outputs, I want us to look into, of course, some of the images or how they were laid out are not necessarily so polished. Okay, so I understand that. But even in the class, I tell my students that your outputs do not need to be like professionally done, because I'm after the message of your outputs. I'm after how clearly you were able to integrate your sources as a language class. So when we see the infograph, of course, we want it to be attractive. We want the message to be concise. And students can actually produce very good outputs, very good materials. I myself, I'm impressed with the skills that students have when we require them this kind of multimodal tasks in the classroom. But I remind my students that it's not about how beautiful it looks or how appealing it looks. It should really focus on the messaging, how clear, how accurate, and how meaningful. So for an SDG related infographic to work, students need to make careful decisions. So for some, they can actually do this in an hour or so. For some students, they would need a little time to like polish it. But the most important thing is they're presenting it and they have a target audience in mind. Because if they have actual real people in mind, then what they're doing becomes very meaningful to them. So this is why I use infographics, because I understand that they're also visual learners. And this is also becomes their avenue, because sometimes they really hate writing essay. They hate me when I require them to write essay. So when I require them to produce these creative outputs, then they become more engaged. You can actually see their discussion to be more like there's a lot of noise happening inside my classroom if they talk about this kind of outputs compared when I require them to write essays. So this is where SDG learning becomes more practical. Students learn that advocacy requires not just how it has to be very creative, but the actual content and how meaningful they are in the process of creating it. So they have to, and they know, and they become owners of this initiative. So I go back to the first slide that I shared with you a while ago. That for our Gen Z learners, the SDGs are meaningful because they connect to the actual issues that they see, they experience, and that they talk about among themselves when we're not around. So in my classroom practice, yes, we still use the traditional essay writing that we require from our students, but I try to introduce what they love to do, such as infographics, digital, um, whatnot, into their advocacies, so that it's not about simply being aware of what these SDGs are, but explaining it clearly and taking part and really owning it as part of what they do. So for me, the value of teaching SDG through advocacy and multimodal learning is very valuable, and we have a role as educators to be part of it because it helps our students see communication not just for English or language classes, but even in other classrooms, and they see it as their way of participating in social issues. So that ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Maraming salamat po. Sir Aris, nakamute po kayo. Sorry.
Hello, sorry, I cannot unmute myself. But thank you
Oh,
so much for sharing your presentation, Gina.
thank
Um,
you.
we'll proceed with the question and answer. I have a few questions in mind while we're waiting for our participants for their question. And you've shared about multimodal learning, and we also have to acknowledge that not only in the Philippines but uh, worldwide, there are some varying levels of digital literacy or even access to technology.
Yes.
Uh, what tips can you share for those teachers that have somehow challenges in those aspects?
What I shared with you this morning is just one of the outputs. So in there are also several uh, digital outputs that we require from students, such as like uh, short form of videos. And I understand that not all would have equal access to this kind of digital tools. So a simple, if it's going back to paper and pen, cutting
Mhm.
out photos from magazines or newspapers, that's actually multimodal in a way
Mhm.
where we do not just confine our students in creating long text, but they can actually translate their messages into like like what I said, like cutting out photos or images from magazines or newspapers if they don't have access to the digital tools that we have. So that can be one way. No? So there are, we can't discount how creative our students can be
Mhm.
when we challenge them to come up with materials or outputs. Yeah, particularly schools from the rural areas where the internet connection is not even
Right.
stable, right? So we can't really like demand this kind of outputs to these areas. But like what we said, we can always go back to the traditional way of getting our old newspapers or magazines and asking them like if you are to like present this? How would you choose images that would capture the message that you have in mind? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I remember before that we had that activity even to have that infographics. Coming from an engineering standpoint, there's some creative aspect involved in developing infographics. Can you share some tips for some teachers that are coming from STEM, sciences, engineering, or even computer studies?
So in terms of the like how they should do infographics, is that the question, Sir Aris?
Yes.
So I
Uh,
think the principle of infographics is very simple, just like how we see ads on billboards or how we see materials on posters. The principle is the same, where there's really no time to read long text. Therefore, we have to keep the message very clear in a very concise manner. So, how do we encourage our students to do that, regardless if this is an engineering or it's a STEM course? So actually it's more challenging because now they have to get away, they have to make the information very concise without the help of paragraphs or series of
mm,
sentences. So it's actually giving them the creative ways on capturing the message into very meaningful form. So maybe not just photos, even how they choose colors, right?
mm.
So how they choose colors become meaningful as long as the colors are understood by the community. Because, for example, in LaSalle, green is something that we
Yeah, we have
understand,
we have some
right?
meaning. Mm,
Exactly. It has a meaning to us because we belong to the same community, but we can't always assume that that color will have the same meaning
mm.
if you bring it somewhere in Katipunan, right? So that would be different. So I think we have to look into who will be the target audience and what kind of information that the first thing that when they see the color or when they see the photo or when they see an image, like they will have a clear message that this is what we're telling them. So I think regardless of if this is on health issues, like creating health advisories, for example. So the reason why health advisories are effective, it's because even if they are in an infograph format, the target patients, for example, can clearly understand what they mean. Yeah. So I think it boils down to what is the common understanding of the community
Right.
in terms of how we use images. Whether, say, for example, you're part of a conservative community, therefore, even the images that you're using should also conform to the conservative nature of the members, right?
There is also a suggestion by Arlene Marasigan to use or get materials from nature. So it's
Yeah,
somehow a creative approach in developing infographics.
agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
Gina, in your initial slides, you showed somehow an outcomes-based objective or syllabus part of uh, how the students would actually develop the infographics. Can you share some assessments that you have developed, or even part of the rubric? What items do you look for in an infographic to somehow you know that okay, this conveys a good concept, or this provides a connection to the viewers?
Yes, sir. So when I check for their output, so we have a rubric, and part of the rubric is it goes back to our ELGAs that do they reflect our attributes that they are really not just producing the academic because it's a requirement, but it's really something that will be useful in the community. So one, of course, choosing the topic is already given. So they have to choose a topic that's really happening in their community or they're actually experiencing. So that's given, and that is really the most important thing. And because it's a language classroom, one of the things that we require from our students is to incorporate sources, because like what we mentioned a while ago, we just don't want them to embrace the trends that they see just because it's trending, they embrace it. But we want them to be critical. Therefore, even when they present the sources in their infographics, we want them to be responsible, that your audience would want to, because when they see your materials, they would also believe that. Therefore, and if they want to dig in deeper, lead them to actual materials that would help them learn more about the issue. So including, so the parenthetical citations would be obviously a marker that this is a language class, because we require our students to present their sources, because that would help and check if their information is actually accurate. So that's checking not just how attractive or appealing the outputs are, but how accurate the information that they are presenting.
Again, thank you so much, Gina, for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, and uh, your multimodal learning approach in your class. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you to
And and
Aris.
and now to present the certificate to our speaker. Okay, so this is to present the certificate to Miss Gina B. Ugalingan, resource speaker, in grateful acknowledgement of her valuable contribution as a resource speaker in the LaSalle Sustainability Lecture Series with the topic Teaching Sustainable Development Goals Through Advocacy and Multimodal Learning, given this day, 29th day of April 2026, signed by Professor Alvin B. Colaba, Director of Center for Engineering and Sustainable Development Research, and also signed by Professor Raymond R. Tan, Vice President for Research and Innovation. Thank you so much, Ms. Gina, for today's lecture.
Welcome, sir, and thank you for allowing me to share my classroom practices as well.
All right. I think that ends our lecture for today. And we would love to hear your thoughts or your feedback by clicking the link shown here, or uh, through the QR code as shown in the slide. And we hope to see you again next month on our next LaSalle Sustainability Lectures. Thank you, everyone. Miss Gina, maraming salamat. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Okay, we'll be closing the room. Thank you, everyone. See you on our next lecture series. Dean K, thank you. Rio Del, maraming salamat. Miss Leia.